What if I told you that spiritual giftedness isn't what you've been led to believe? You see, we've been conditioned to think of spiritual gifts as rare phenomena bestowed upon the chosen few. But here's the thing. These gifts are not external acquisitions, but rather innate aspects of your being waiting to be recognized. Think about it. What if the very traits you dismiss as ordinary are actually profound markers of your spiritual nature? The 7 traits we'll explore today aren't mystical powers, but subtle orientations of consciousness that reveal your deeper connection to what is. Let me tell you something. Understanding these traits isn't about spiritual superiority. It's about recognizing what you already are. We live in a culture obsessed with the extraordinary. Have you ever wondered why we're so fascinated by psychic abilities, yet overlook the profound awareness available in ordinary moments? We chase after levitation while ignoring the miracle of simply standing. We seek telepathy while missing the deep knowing that occurs in a moment of genuine connection with another human being. It's almost comical how we travel to exotic retreats, searching for spiritual awakening, while the dishes in our sink offer the same opportunity for presence. Our society has created an entire spiritual marketplace selling experiences, techniques, certifications. As if enlightenment were another degree to hang on your wall. As if awakening were another achievement to list on your spiritual resume. But the great spiritual teachers throughout history have been pointing to something entirely different. You see, genuine spiritual gifts aren't supernatural powers that set you apart from others. They are natural capacities of human consciousness that connect you more deeply to all of life. I once knew a man who spent 30 years searching for enlightenment. He traveled to India, Tibet, Japan. He studied with renowned teachers, mastered difficult practices, accumulated impressive spiritual credentials. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, while waiting for a bus in the rain, he suddenly recognized what had always been true. The awareness he had been seeking had been present all along. It wasn't something to achieve, but something to notice. These traits are not like rare gemstones you must hunt for in exotic locations. They are more like the seeds already planted in the fertile soil of your being, simply waiting for the right conditions to flourish. When a seed sprouts, it doesn't need to be taught how to become a tree. It already contains the complete intelligence for its unfolding. Similarly, these spiritual traits are inherent to your nature. They are already there. They are already complete. They are already perfect. But our Western mindset struggles with this concept. We've built an entire culture around acquisition, achievement, progress. We've turned spirituality into another achievement, another acquisition, another thing to display. But spirituality isn't something you get. It's something you recognize you've always had. It's not about adding. It's about uncovering. It's not about becoming. It's about recognizing we've been taught to measure success by what we accumulate. We measure worth by what we produce. We measure growth by what we can demonstrate. But genuine spiritual unfoldment follows none of these patterns. Now, there are 7 traits that, when recognized and honored, reveal your inherent spiritual nature. Not because they make you special, but because they make you aware of what already is. We'll explore each of these traits, not as goals to achieve, but as aspects to recognize in ourselves. They aren't badges of spiritual superiority, but doorways into a more authentic relationship with reality. Think of them as facets of a single gem. Each offers a slightly different view, but all reveal the same light. Each provides a different entry point into the same recognition. Each speaks to a different aspect of our human experience, yet all point to the same essential truth. Before we examine these traits, I invite you to consider, what if your spiritual journey isn't about becoming someone new, but about unbecoming all that you are not? What if the path isn't about accumulation, but subtraction? What if enlightenment is less like building a tower and more like excavating a well? You might discover that what you've been seeking has been seeking you. Our culture treats spirituality like climbing a mountain, higher and higher, further and further from ordinary life. But what if it's more like diving into the ocean, not away from life, but deeper into its very essence, not separate from everyday experience, but at the heart of it? Many seekers spend decades looking for extraordinary experiences, hoping for dramatic breakthroughs. And there's nothing wrong with profound spiritual experiences. They can be important signposts. But the true measure of spiritual awakening isn't the height of your peak experiences, but the depth of your engagement with ordinary life. These 7 traits: profound presence, radical acceptance, intuitive knowing, boundless compassion, authentic expression, cosmic perspective, and inner stillness, are not achievements, but recognitions. They don't make you special. They reveal what is already special about being alive. They don't set you apart from others. They connect you more deeply to all of life. They aren't supernatural additions to your humanness, but revelations of what being fully human actually means. The irony is that the moment you stop seeking spiritual gifts as special additions to your identity, you begin to recognize the gifts that have always been available. The moment you abandon the pursuit of extraordinary powers, you discover the extraordinary nature of your ordinary awareness. Let's begin with the first trait, which forms the foundation for all others. Because without this first recognition, the others remain theoretical concepts rather than lived realities. This first trait is the doorway through which all other aspects of spiritual awareness become accessible. It is both the beginning of the journey and its constant companion. The first trait of spiritual giftedness is profound presence. This isn't merely paying attention, it's complete attention to what is, without the filters of past or future. It's total immersion in the immediacy of experience before the mind divides it into subject and object, before memory colors it, before anticipation distorts it. The paradox is this: the more deeply present you are, the less you exist as a separate self. In complete presence, the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, and what remains is simply awareness aware of itself through the particular form of your experience. I once knew someone who spent years in meditation retreats, diligently following breathing techniques, mantras, visualizations. He was seeking the profound states described in ancient texts. Yet after almost a decade, he confided that his most significant realization came not during formal practice, but while washing dishes at the retreat center. In that ordinary moment, when he wasn't trying to achieve anything spiritual, the boundary between washer and washed, between doer and deed, between self and experience suddenly vanished. He discovered that presence wasn't about escaping the world, but fully entering it. This is what Zen masters mean when they speak of no mind. Not emptiness in the sense of vacancy or nothingness, but fullness so complete it transcends the boundary between observer and observed. It's what athletes call being in the zone, what artists experience as creative flow, what children naturally embody before self-consciousness develops. Have you ever been so absorbed in an activity that you forgot yourself? That wasn't self-loss, but self-transcendence. It wasn't absence, but complete presence. In such moments, you're not less alive, but more fully alive than when caught in the grip of self-referential thinking. You're experiencing reality directly, without the mediating filter of concepts, judgments, and stories about who you are and what life is. This presence isn't something exotic or foreign to your nature. It's your most natural state. Before thinking, before concepts, before identity formation, there is simply aware presence. Everything else is built upon this foundation, yet we've become so identified with our mental constructs that this fundamental awareness seems distant or difficult to access. Now this brings us to the second trait of spiritual giftedness. You see, profound presence naturally gives rise to our second trait, which is radical acceptance. This is the capacity to embrace what is without resistance, judgment, or attachment. It's the ability to say a complete yes to reality as it presents itself moment by moment. Like water that takes the shape of any container without losing its essential nature, radical acceptance allows you to flow with life's changing circumstances while remaining grounded in your essential being. Water doesn't fight against the shape of the vessel that contains it. It doesn't wish to be in a different container. It simply fills the space it occupies completely, adapting without resistance. The paradox of acceptance is this: the moment you truly accept something, you become free of its power over you. What you resist persists. What you embrace transforms. This doesn't mean you approve of everything or that you don't take action to change harmful circumstances. It means you start from a place of acknowledging what is, rather than arguing with reality. I knew a woman who spent years fighting against a chronic illness, seeing it as an enemy that had invaded her life, something to be conquered and defeated. Her resistance created a constant state of inner tension that only exacerbated her condition. The turning point came when she began to practice radical acceptance, not giving up on treatment, not resigning herself to suffering, but fully acknowledging her reality without the additional layer of resistance. Acceptance is not resignation. Acceptance is not passivity. Acceptance is profound recognition of what is. This is what Buddhists call equanimity and what Christian mystics referred to as surrender. It's what the Tao Te Ching points to when it speaks of living in harmony with the natural flow of existence. It's not a passive state, but a deeply receptive one. Not weak, but profoundly strong in its flexibility and adaptability. When you develop radical acceptance, something extraordinary happens. You stop being in conflict with reality itself. You step out of the exhausting battle against what already is. Think about how much energy you expend fighting against the unavoidable facts of your experience. The traffic jam that makes you late. The rainy day that disrupts your plans. The personality trait in your partner that triggers your irritation. The physical limitation that restricts your activity. We humans are quite remarkable in our ability to argue with reality. As if by rejecting what is, we could somehow make it disappear. As if by resisting the present moment, we could make it conform to our preferences. It would be hilarious if it weren't the source of so much unnecessary suffering. What if that energy were liberated? What if instead of fighting against what is, you channeled that same energy into creative engagement with life as it actually presents itself? This doesn't mean you abandon discernment or cease working for positive change. It means you act from a place of clarity rather than reactivity, from acceptance rather than rejection. This acceptance leads naturally to our third trait of spiritual giftedness, intuitive knowing. This is wisdom that arises not from logical deduction, but from direct perception. It's understanding that bypasses the sequential steps of reasoning and arrives immediately at insight. Like knowing how to balance on a bicycle. Impossible to explain, yet your body knows perfectly. You can't transfer this knowledge through concepts or instructions. It must be experienced directly. The paradox of intuitive knowing is this. The more you trust this knowing, the more reliable it becomes, yet the less you can claim it as yours. It's as if you're tapping into a field of intelligence that extends beyond your personal mind. The more you recognize yourself as a conduit rather than a creator of this knowing, the more readily it flows. I knew a businessman who built his success on following intuitive hunches that often contradicted the logical analysis of his advisors. Time and again, his inner knowing would point in a different direction than spreadsheets and market projections. When asked about his process, he'd simply say, "I don't know how I know, I just know." His most successful ventures came when he followed this guidance even when it seemed irrational by conventional standards. This is what mystics call gnosis, what Taoists call Wu Wei, what indigenous peoples recognize as ancestral wisdom. It's direct perception unmediated by conceptual thought. Not irrational, but transrational. Not subjective whim, but connection to a deeper order of knowing. These first three traits, profound presence, radical acceptance, and intuitive knowing, form a foundation. Each enables the others in a beautiful synchronicity. Presence allows you to perceive reality directly. Acceptance creates the receptive space for that perception to occur without distortion. Intuitive knowing arises naturally when presence and acceptance have cleared the channel. We've been taught to value only what we can measure and explain, yet our deepest knowing transcends both. We've been conditioned to trust only what can be proven through logical analysis, yet the most significant insights often arrive through different pathways altogether. Now let's explore how these internal recognitions naturally extend outward through the next traits, revealing how spiritual giftedness manifests not just in our relationship with ourselves, but in our engagement with all of life. The fourth trait of spiritual giftedness is boundless compassion. This isn't the compassion we typically think of as a virtue to cultivate or an emotion to generate. It's the natural response of a mind that no longer sees separation between self and other. When the boundaries of the separate self begin to dissolve through presence, acceptance, and intuitive knowing, compassion isn't something you do, it's something you are. It flows naturally, like water moving downhill, requiring no effort or thought. True compassion requires both complete involvement and perfect detachment. This paradox confuses the logical mind, but makes perfect sense experientially. You're fully present with suffering, completely engaged with it, while simultaneously free from being overwhelmed by it. Like the sun that shines equally on everything without preference or depletion, this compassion extends to all beings without discrimination or exhaustion. I knew a hospital chaplain who worked with the dying for decades. In her early years, she approached compassion as something she needed to generate, a kind of emotional resource she would deplete and need to replenish. She'd often experience burnout, needing retreats and time away to restore her capacity to care. But gradually, something shifted. She discovered that when she stopped identifying compassion as something she personally possessed or created, a boundless wellspring became available. Compassion began flowing through her rather than from her. She found herself fully present with those suffering, while simultaneously held in a vast spaciousness that remained untouched by grief. What if compassion isn't something you do but something you are when the illusion of separateness fades? What if it's not a special quality of saints and spiritual masters but the natural condition of a consciousness that recognizes its fundamental non-separation from all that is? What if the capacity for boundless compassion is already complete within you, merely waiting for the dissolution of the boundaries that seem to separate you from others? This is what Buddhists call karuna, Christians call agape, and Sufis recognize as the essence of divine love. It's what indigenous wisdom traditions understand as the natural way of being when we remember our place in the great web of life. Not a special achievement of particularly evolved individuals, but the birthright of all beings who recognize their true nature. But here's the thing about boundless compassion. As it deepens, it naturally gives rise to our fifth trait of spiritual giftedness: authentic expression. When you're no longer bound by the illusion of separation, when compassion flows freely and naturally, what emerges is the unfiltered expression of your true nature. Authentic expression is the natural overflow of your true nature, unfiltered by social conditioning or fear. It's allowing the unique note that only you can contribute to sound clearly in the great symphony of existence. The paradox here is profound. The more authentically you express yourself, the less the expression belongs to you. It becomes less about self-expression in the egoic sense, and more about life expressing itself through your particular form. Like water finding its own level, authenticity seeks expression through the unique vessel of your life. It follows the natural contours of your specific gifts, temperament, and experiences, yet isn't contained or defined by them. It flows through these particularities without being limited by them. I once met a writer who spent decades crafting works she thought would impress critics and establish her literary reputation. Her writing was technically excellent, but somehow lifeless. Then, following a profound awakening experience, she abandoned all concern for how her work would be received. She began writing from a place of listening rather than constructing, of allowing rather than controlling. What emerged wasn't just more authentic, but seemed to come from a source beyond her personal mind. Her work became both more unique and more universal simultaneously, more distinctly hers, and yet less about her. It's almost comical how much effort we expend maintaining our carefully constructed personas. We have our professional self, our social media self, our family self, our romantic partner self. We exhaust ourselves shape-shifting between these various performances, constantly checking to see if we're making the right impression, gaining the right approval, avoiding the wrong criticism. We're like actors who've been on stage so long we've forgotten we're playing a role. This is what artists call inspiration, what prophets knew as divine utterance, what performers recognize as being in the zone, the sense that something is moving through you rather than coming from you, that you're a vessel or instrument for something larger than your individual self. We've been taught to perform versions of ourselves deemed acceptable, marketable, lovable. But what if your truest expression is what the world most needs? What if the gift you're meant to offer can't be found in conformity, but only in the authentic expression of your unique nature? What if what we call finding yourself is actually allowing yourself to be found? Authenticity threatens systems. It disturbs convenience. It disrupts expectations. It challenges consensus reality. This is precisely why genuine spiritual giftedness often manifests as a kind of holy troublemaking, a divine disruption of calcified patterns and structures. Think about how much energy you spend crafting a self that others will approve of. The constant monitoring, adjusting, comparing, and performing. What if that energy were channeled into true expression? Not expression for the sake of rebellion or attention, but expression that emerges naturally when all pretense falls away. Now, authentic expression naturally opens the door to our sixth trait of spiritual giftedness: cosmic perspective. This is the capacity to see beyond the limited viewpoint of the separate self to the vast interconnected whole. It's the ability to zoom out from the narrow aperture of personal concerns and glimpse the larger patterns and processes of existence. Like stepping back from examining a single leaf to behold the entire forest ecosystem, cosmic perspective reveals relationships, patterns, and meanings invisible from a more limited vantage point. It doesn't negate the significance of the particular. Instead, it reveals how each particular element participates in and contributes to the whole. The paradox of cosmic perspective is this: the more expansive your perspective becomes, the more meaningful small acts appear. When you perceive the profound interconnection of all things, even the simplest gesture reverberates through the entire web. Washing a dish becomes a cosmic act. Speaking a kind word becomes a universe-shifting event. Nothing is merely personal or insignificant when seen from this wider view. I knew a physicist who experienced a spontaneous expansion of awareness while watching his child play in a park. In that ordinary moment, the boundaries of his perception suddenly expanded. He saw not just his child, but the vast processes that had brought this moment into being. The billions of years of cosmic evolution, the precise balancing of fundamental forces that allowed matter to form, the emergence of life on Earth, the long journey of human development, all of it present and visible in this single moment of a child at play. He realized he wasn't observing this from the outside, but participating in it from within. This is what mystics call unity consciousness, what astronomers feel when contemplating the cosmos, what indigenous peoples honor as the web of life. It's the recognition that we exist within vast interconnected systems that extend far beyond our individual lifespans or personal concerns. Not as separate observers, but as integral participants, both infinitesimally small in the cosmic scale and immeasurably significant in our unique contribution. These middle traits, boundless compassion, authentic expression, and cosmic perspective, reveal how spiritual awareness naturally moves from internal recognition to engagement with all of existence. They show how the inward journey of presence, acceptance, and intuitive knowing naturally unfolds into a transformed relationship with others and with life itself. We are not separate observers of life, but expressions of life itself observing through our unique vantage points. The universe experiences itself through the particular form of your consciousness. This isn't poetic metaphor, but literal description of how consciousness functions when recognized in its true nature. And this brings us to our seventh and perhaps most misunderstood trait of spiritual giftedness. A trait that isn't so much the culmination of a linear progression as the ground from which all the others emerge. The trait without which none of the others would be possible, yet which paradoxically can only be recognized once the others have been experienced. The seventh trait of spiritual giftedness is inner stillness. This is the ground of being from which all experience arises and to which all returns. It's the silent, spacious awareness that underlies all the movement of life. I sometimes think of this trait as both the beginning and the end of the spiritual journey, the foundation and the culmination. In a sense, all the other traits are simply what becomes recognizable when this fundamental stillness is acknowledged. Stillness is not the absence of movement, but the presence of that which allows movement to be perceived. Just as space doesn't oppose the objects that appear within it, but makes their existence possible, inner stillness doesn't oppose or exclude any experience, but provides the context in which all experience unfolds. Like the depths of the ocean remaining undisturbed while waves play on the surface, This stillness remains untouched by the changing circumstances of your life. I knew a spiritual seeker who devoted years to various meditation practices designed to achieve inner stillness. He tried concentrating on his breath, repeating mantras, focusing on energy centers, all in an attempt to quiet his mind. The more he strived for stillness, the more elusive it seemed. Then, during a particularly frustrating meditation session, he suddenly realized that his very searching was obscuring what he sought. The stillness he was trying to create through effort was already present as the awareness beholding his efforts. The seeking itself was happening within the stillness he sought. In that moment, he laughed out loud at the cosmic joke. What he had been trying to attain through years of practice was what was enabling the practice itself. This is what contemplatives call the ground of being, what Taoists name the unnameable Tao, what quantum physicists might describe as the quantum field from which all phenomena arise. It's what various traditions point to as pure consciousness, primordial awareness, the absolute, the void. Not nothing in the sense of absence or negation, but no thing in the sense of not being any particular object of experience. What if what you're seeking isn't something to be found, but the awareness in which all finding happens? What if the seeker and the search are themselves appearances within what is being sought? What if stillness isn't a state to be achieved, but the ever-present context of all states? I've come to understand that each of our spiritual gifts emerges from this fundamental stillness and ultimately leads back to its recognition. These 7 traits: profound presence, radical acceptance, intuitive knowing, boundless compassion, authentic expression, cosmic perspective, and inner stillness, are not separate achievements, but facets of your natural state. They're not qualities to be developed, but aspects of what you already are when the veils of conditioning and misidentification fall away. You see, they're all reflections of the same recognition, that what you are is not limited to the story of a separate self. Presence becomes possible when you're not constantly absorbed in thoughts about past and future. Acceptance flows naturally when you're not identified with preferences and aversions. Intuitive knowing emerges when the noise of discursive thinking subsides. Compassion arises spontaneously when the illusion of separation dissolves. Authentic expression manifests when you're not confined by social conditioning. Cosmic perspective opens up when you're not trapped in personal viewpoints. And inner stillness is recognized as the constant reality underlying all these expressions. Each trait supports and enhances the others in a beautiful synchronicity. Presence allows stillness to be recognized. Stillness deepens presence. Acceptance becomes possible through intuitive knowing. Knowing is refined through acceptance. Compassion flows from cosmic perspective. Perspective expands through compassion. They aren't sequential steps, but simultaneous aspects of a single recognition unfolding in different dimensions of experience. Remember, we began by questioning the conventional understanding of spiritual gifts as rare, supernatural abilities bestowed upon the chosen few. We challenged the idea that spiritual giftedness means having extraordinary powers or experiences that set you apart from others. Instead, we've been exploring a very different understanding of what it means to be spiritually gifted. What if spiritual giftedness isn't something extraordinary, but the recognition of the extraordinary within the ordinary? What if it's not about transcending your humanity, but fully inhabiting it? What if the most profound spiritual gift is simply the recognition of what has been true all along? The final irony is this: the moment you recognize these traits not as achievements, but as your natural state, the less you need to identify with being spiritually gifted at all. The whole notion of spiritual specialness or giftedness falls away. You realize that what you've been calling spiritual gifts are simply what happens when the contractions of fear, separation, and misidentification begin to release. We humans are quite amusing in our spiritual pursuits. We go from wanting material possessions to wanting spiritual attainments, from collecting things to collecting experiences, from competing for status to competing for enlightenment. We trade our designer clothes for mala beads, our luxury cars for meditation cushions, our corporate titles for spiritual lineages. But the fundamental pattern remains the same. I have, I achieve, I attain, I am special. Yet true spiritual unfoldment moves in exactly the opposite direction. Not toward having more, but toward being more fully what you already are. Not toward accumulation, but toward recognition. Not toward specialness, but toward commonality. You might glimpse your true nature in the spaces between thoughts, in moments of unexpected beauty, in acts of spontaneous kindness that arise before you can claim them as yours. These glimpses are available to everyone, though often overlooked in our busy, outward-focused lives. You felt it when completely absorbed in creative flow, in moments of deep connection, in the silent awareness that witnesses it all. These aren't exotic experiences, but natural occurrences that reveal what's always true. I'm not saying this recognition is easy in a world that constantly pulls your attention outward and reinforces separation. Our entire culture, educational system, and economic structure is built upon strengthening rather than questioning the sense of separate selfhood. The current runs strong in the direction of fragmentation rather than wholeness, acquisition rather than recognition, complexity rather than simplicity. But I am saying it's natural, it's available, and it's what you already are beneath the layers of conditioning. We've been taught to seek outside ourselves what can only be recognized within. We've been conditioned to strive for what is already present. We've been trained to become what we already are. So if you have these 7 traits, you're spiritually gifted. But not because you've acquired something special. Rather, because you've recognized what was never absent. Your inseparability from the wholeness of existence itself. You're gifted not by having gained something others lack, but by having recognized something universally true that many overlook. The ultimate spiritual gift may be the recognition that there is no separate you to be gifted in the first place. That the very notion of individual spiritual attainment is based on the same misunderstanding that spiritual awakening clarifies. That what we call spirituality is not the property of an individual, but the nature of reality itself recognizing itself through the particular form of your life. And in that recognition, ordinary life reveals itself as the extraordinary gift it has always been. The simple act of breathing becomes miraculous. The meeting of eyes with another becomes profound communion. The taste of tea becomes direct contact with the mystery of existence. Nothing needs to be added or removed for sacredness to be revealed. Nothing needs to change for wholeness to be recognized. What you seek is what is seeking. What you long for is what is calling. What you hope to become is what you already are. The journey from here to here, from now to now, from self to self may be the only journey there is. And perhaps that's the greatest gift of all. The discovery that you've never been separate from the gift you seek.